I'm joined on stage once again by Betsy, also by Kim Nielsen and Rihanna Gowan. And Kim and Rihanna are going to share tips and tricks in how we think about managing complex service-based categories, but I think really any complex category. Ones where there's a lot going on, it's not necessarily clear who has responsibility and accountability for who's doing what the role of procurement is, and how to really maximize the impact that procurement have in those kind of categories. They have experience specifically in contingent labor and in engineering and construction. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about those as the vehicle, if you will, for discussing complex categories. Regina just saying, yep, she has her hands full right now for sure with elastomers, resins, metals. So with that, Betsy, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to see if I can fix my camera and my mic on my other computer in the meantime.
All right.
So take it away, Betsy.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, we're doing all sorts of things to manage the benefits of a live session. So what we're going to talk about now is our perspective on managing complex services. So I'm joined today by Kim, who is our SME on contingent labor, and by Rihanna, who has sourced a wide variety of services, including contingent labor, but also has been focusing lately a lot on engineering and construction services. And, there's a lot of uniqueness to these categories, but there are a lot of common challenges as well. And so what we wanted to talk about today is, if you were in the last session, sort of a similar approach in terms of defining, what do we see as the problem? What are we experiencing, within our client engagements as issues with managing complex services spend, and, how are those problems and challenges impacting procurement organizations? And then most importantly, what can we do about them? So I want to bring in Kim and Rihanna to the discussion. I would say, in my experience, and I've sourced services a lot over my career too, I think, at times we tend to think of services as that you can't apply the same approaches to sourcing and category management of services that you can for goods. The agreements are completely different. The way the transactions are set up has to be completely different. And I would say that, my experience over, the last 10 years or so has been that, yes, there are nuances when you're buying services. Obviously, you're dealing with people and the complexities that humans bring to any equation, but also, that there are some unique challenges, but that you can apply a lot of the same elements of category management and sourcing to services that you can within, more material-based categories. So I'm curious, Kim and Rihanna, in your experience, what have you seen as, the most common challenges with managing and sourcing services spend? And Kim, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So thanks, Betsy. I'm going to focus primarily on contingent labor because that's what I know the best. And I think people often underestimate contingent labor. They think it could be an easy category, but I actually think it's highly complex. One, you're purchasing people in all intents purposes. But two, if you have a large organization and you have a large spend within contingent labor and it's global, there's lots of different things that span across different regions, such as different labor laws, different compliance things and different regulations that you have to follow. So you have to make sure that you're following all of those things when you bring on contingent labor. Just as we talked in the last session about data is highly important with contingent labor. If you don't really understand everyone that you have, like, for example, who is in your building today, who has access to your networks, who has your badges, all of those types of things. If you don't have visibility into that, it can cause issues. Are they following the proper HR guidelines? Are they being onboarded properly? Did they receive background checks and drug screens? So all of that is very important when it comes to contingent labor and having the visibility into all of that data. Also, the different types of worker classifications that you're going to come across. It's not just staff augmentation. there's 1099s, there's statement of work, there's consulting firms. Oftentimes staff aug is hidden within statement of work spend. So there's just a lot of different, nuances to the category, and being able to, make sure that you understand all of those things and have insight to all of those things to make sure that you can really manage the strategy properly.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. And, I think contingent labor especially is one of those categories that it does get often not necessarily overlooked, but I think it's one of those where there's so many different people involved. It's sort of like everybody's a stakeholder and yet nobody's a stakeholder.
Yeah.
So really, getting people to take ownership of it. And, I know we're going to talk a little bit later when we get to, some of the solutions about, really having a defined process for contingent labor, a process and a policy, and really just looking at it as a program.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. So Rihanna, I'm curious with you and your experience, what are some of the challenges that you've had with sourcing and managing services spend?
Yeah. And, specifically if we're talking about engineering and construction services here today, we encounter some of the same issues that Kim does in contingent labor with worker classifications and things like that. But you also add in the layer of, when you're talking about market uncertainty, in addition to economic factors, you're also looking at the impact of natural disasters and emergency events on the execution of this construction and engineering work. So for example, right now, if we're talking electric construction services, we're seeing resources be pulled from, planned routine maintenance work to go support emergency response work with regard to Hurricane Ida, to restore electricity to customers out there, or with the wildfires on the West Coast and across the country. So we have that layer. And then as well, that leads us to some safety and compliance considerations. So how do we make sure that we have enough qualified resources to get this critical work done, while also making sure that they're performing the work safely among these other challenges and amid these disasters?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I sort of slightly in a slightly cheeky way on here talked about corralling stakeholders. Originally, I was using the word wrangling, and that felt maybe a little too pejorative, but the idea that, again, whether it's contingent labor or, maybe a more specialized type of service category, the stakeholders oftentimes can be, spread out across the organization. You'll find them at all levels of the organization. Some of them may have never worked with procurement before, don't really know what procurement's role is, may see, your role in some ways sort of as a duplication of theirs. And, so I think a lot of times that leads to poor project management when we talk about sourcing project management. And so we'll talk in a little bit about, some of our recommendations for how to address that. The fact it's kind of back to this concept of everybody thinks everybody else is leading something, or everybody thinks everybody else is managing the process. So then in the end, nobody manages it. And so I think, having a good solid relationship with those stakeholders is critical, but also, the understanding of what you're buying, and that, all services categories are not created equal. And I'm sure you've, Rihanna, over your career, had to just do some, nighttime reading of like, what am I actually buying? And, how can I be credible in front of these stakeholders? Okay, so why don't we move to the next slide, and let's talk a bit about, so how do these challenges impact procurement organizations? How does this impact either your sourcing approach, your category plan? Kim, what's been your experience? I know you and I have talked a lot about the impact of rogue spend, and, just the fact that there's so many requirements coming from so many different places, so many different suppliers, how do you see these challenges impacting procurement organizations?
So I think contingent labor definitely has a lot of rogue spend, especially if you don't have a program or a mandate or a policy in place. So what I've seen, just from a client recently, they had no mandated program. There was really no one leading it. It was kind of just a category that was stuck within professional services, and it was managed by someone that also managed marketing and HR and benefits. And the program was rather large. They had over $500 million in contingent labor spend. And so when you have something like that and that large of a category, that large of spend, being able to pull that out on its own and having someone manage just that, because contingent labor isn't just, writing contracts for your suppliers and then letting it go. It's truly a whole management. It's truly a program. So being able to pull that aside, manage it independently, create a process, a policy, if you don't already have an MSP or a VMS, possibly bringing in those types of organizations and tools to help manage the program so that you have insight into the spend and the visibility, and you can get some of that rogue spend under control. I in a different organization, they had over 1,000 staffing vendors, and some of them only had one worker, and some had 0, and some had 50. So managing that large tail of spend and being able to rationalize those suppliers. So you can go from 1,000 down to 20 with staffing. You really can. If you can find 20 great supplier partnerships that are global, if your organization is global, or national, if your organization is national, that can, fill all the different types of contingent labor needs you have. And you'd be able to see a large amount of savings just by reducing that tail spend. So rogue spend is definitely, an issue when it comes to contingent labor for sure.
Yeah. And what do you think about, the concept that with contingent labor and a lot of professional services categories as well, the stakeholders are so spread out across the organization. And, at one point you could be dealing with everybody from, the CEO down to, somebody in a plant or, somebody that, a receptionist. And so, I think the importance of taking the time, to really understand, and the fact that it does take a lot of time when you've got stakeholders that are so spread out, to really understand their needs.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, you're absolutely right. There's, anyone could need a temporary resource if that's what we're really talking about here. So, understanding their needs, doing, definitely spending that time with them to understand truly what they're looking for, or even taking the time beforehand to look back at your data, going back to the data piece and looking historically, who have we hired as contingent workers? What have they been doing? And putting, policies around even what types of workers you'll be bringing in as contingent. One client that I had, they had a policy around if the project was less than 2 weeks, you weren't allowed to bring in a contingent resource because the time it took to bring on someone and onboard them would take longer than 2 weeks. So it just didn't make sense. So, putting things in place like the engagement has to be for a set amount of time, or, looking at if you can classify what you're going to be looking for, then you can set rates to that. And you have those metrics and that understanding up front so that if the CEO does need, someone to help support them, or that plant worker needs, a whole slew of light industrial workers, you kind of know what you're getting into and understanding, but also having strong supplier partnerships that truly understand how to find those right types of people. You can't really call, a tech firm to bring in a bunch of welders necessarily. So making sure you have the right partnerships.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great segue, Rihanna, to bringing you in, because, a lot of construction services are so specialized. How do you see, again, these challenges sort of impacting organizations that are trying to bring in those types of services?
Yeah, I think for one, you're seeing a much heavier role similar to the program management with contingent labor. you're seeing a much heavier role of procurement throughout the life cycle of a contract, rather than, some categories where you source it, you check in on it, you follow up. But really, with construction services and engineering, you're ingrained with it day to day. You're understanding what's happening in the market with your contractor pool, with different factors that may move contractors from one area to another if you're looking at a programmatic level. And you're seeing how you're dealing a lot with market volatility and change orders, and potentially renegotiation of rates based on the current the size of the qualified contractor pool. And so right now we're seeing with several of our clients that we have this specialized workforce that you can't necessarily just bring on more contractors to grow that number of resources, because when you bring on more contractors, they're all dipping into the same pool, and you're actually leading to competing with yourself and your contractors competing with each other. And then you lead to resources changing hats and turnover for you and decreased productivity. So you really need to understand in your sourcing strategy, how you plan to grow that resource pool, and looking beyond just number of contractors to long-term strategy, and what do your partners have in place to grow their number of qualified resources over time.
Yeah. And I think, when we start talking in a few minutes also about, some of our best practices, I think, one of the things we'll talk about is what is procurement's role really in helping to manage these types of processes. And, I think a couple things on this slide that stand out for me is one is that third bullet about, we definitely encourage cross-functional teams to execute, sourcing events that are focused on maybe more technical or non-administrative skills, because they can be, hard to find. They have to be well-defined. There's a lot of considerations around, safety and compliance and things like that. But, sometimes you see too that procurement teams are sort of unwilling to take that lead role and unwilling to really project manage that cross-functional team. And, and frankly, yes, it does take a lot of time. And it can be a complex process. Again, going back to that wrangling stakeholders comment, there's a lot of moving parts to manage. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, particularly your experience with managing these types of teams and the role that you've played. But I think that's a challenge for a lot of teams is, how do we organize ourselves appropriately to be able to source and manage this spend? Who plays what role? And really, what is procurement's role? And, how can we define that at the outset so that people don't just see us as order takers and sitting there, taking notes in meetings, but that we're really playing a key role in driving the project forward.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just last point I'll make on this slide, because you guys both mentioned it about market volatility. I mean, that's going to be just a recurring theme today. I mentioned in the chat that I hope anybody who's involved in the management of raw material spend will definitely stick with us. We've got some really good sessions coming up that will help address some of those current conditions. But one of the things that we see as well, and even going back to the session we were just talking in about data, sometimes market volatility can cause you to just kind of freak out and make a decision that maybe you get lucky and by following your instinct, you turn out to be right. But when data, when decisions aren't supported by data and, can't be necessarily justified by, the underlying specifics, then if you are right, you're really just getting lucky. And, so we see that as a challenge in this environment too, that, back, Kim, to your point about the company with 1,000 suppliers, I mean, clearly some of those were brought on because somebody panicked and said, oh my God, I need somebody tomorrow, and this is the only company that can give it to me.
Yeah.
So, but again, I mean, but then that has a downstream effect in the sense that, you're creating all of these, creating this super long tail. So anything that either of you want to mention else on this slide, or if not, we can move forward. Good to go?
On this slide. Yep.
Okay. All right. So this is kind of the key slide here. What can we do to overcome these challenges? And we've sort of organized these in terms of things that would happen before and after the sourcing process. So pre-sourcing and post-sourcing, and then what would happen during the sourcing process. Because there are differences. And, I think the way that you plan, and Rihanna can talk to this, the way that you handle these types of whether it's a category strategy or a sourcing event, the way you handle that once the agreements are in place and after the strategy's been implemented will oftentimes affect the way you do it the next time. So, Rihanna, maybe I'll start with you in this case. So what's been your experience in terms of, best practices, things that, you could offer up as ways to help overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I think, and just to reiterate the point, what you do after and before a sourcing event really determines how this and your next sourcing event are going to be successful. And really taking the time, for example, up front to understand the market, understand your contractor pool, understand your internal needs before diving into executing a sourcing strategy. We worked with a category where we needed to source a very large amount of construction services spent in a pretty constrained timeline. And we really were big proponents for, we need to conduct a request for information. We need to go out and we need to understand who's in the market, who can do this work beyond our qualified contractor pool. And back to the point of market volatility, how do they grow their number of resources? How are they going to ensure that, our work continues to be done safely and on time in the midst of, natural disasters and emergency events? And we went out and we ended up identifying 150 contractors, of which maybe, 5% of them applied to the sourcing event we were going out to. But in turn, we were able to build a database of qualified contractors in different specialty areas, and then build into that sourcing event and that strategy to be able to ensure we had the right people invited, the right companies invited. And then on the back end of the sourcing event, making sure that you're tracking against how those contracts are performing, how the contractors are performing, how the pricing mechanisms are working, both with the people on the ground in the business and also with, contract management and accounts payable, so that you can make those tweaks and work with your contractors in the interim as well if there's an operational issue. So that way, the next time you source this and in between as needed, you can shift your strategy and just keep getting better. Yeah.
Kim, what's your experience? I think, you've mentioned a couple times talking about programs, approaching services spend with a programmatic mentality. And what does that really mean? And what are your recommendations for, where should people start in terms of creating a contingent labor program?
Sure. So, if you don't have a contingent labor program already, and first of all, your spend has to be rather large. You wouldn't probably want to bring on a program for just 100 workers necessarily. You could manage that in-house, and a program could be in-house or with an MSP. But I think that you would want to start with your data, obviously looking at it and determining what regions do we have workers in? How many workers do we have? What does our spend look like? How many suppliers do we have? And kind of getting all of that data gathered, analyzed, organized, so that then you can take it out to bid and decide, do I want this to be an MSP? Do I want to look at a Pontoon or a Randstad SourceBright or an Allegis? Or do I want to, have maybe a one supplier manage it? Oftentimes like Randstad will, companies like that will come in and manage a program without really necessarily making it an MSP. Or could you manage it in-house? Do you have the expertise? Do you have a subject matter expert, someone that knows this type of category and what it all entails that can manage this. I would say procurement is definitely where you would want to have it housed. HR does not really like to get involved with contingent labor. They see that as, different than employees because they truly are non-employee workers. You should have HR involved from a governance standpoint, but they really aren't going to want to probably manage this program for you. And so then, conducting your RFP, deciding on what avenue you're going to go, and then bringing in that program and, and managing it. I think one of the best things you could do that I've been a part of in different organizations is branding it, any type of program, whether it's contingent labor or something else, but creating a brand internally and having easy access to, maybe putting it on your intranet site. Maybe it's called the Contingent Resource Center, and you have it on your intranet site, and that's where everyone knows to go within your organization when they need to bring on a contingent worker. And they go out to that intranet site, and it links to the VMS or whatever system you're using to track and bring people on. Definitely a written policy for all the governance around bringing in contingent labor. When to use the program, when not to use the program, is it going to be consulting work too, statement of work, all of that. There's so much to it. And I think, like I said, even other categories besides contingent labor could have the same thought process, like travel. I would say it would be comparable because you would have probably an intranet site and things and policies around travel. So, being able to put all of that together and then putting it to, out to the stakeholders. So buy-in is definite. You need leadership buy-in, communicating, educating, all of those different types of things so that people use the program. As far as putting it in mandate to use the program, if you really want to capture all of that data and spend and even look for savings and be able to make sure you have control over the category, then mandating it as well.
Yeah, and I think too that extends also to the suppliers, meaning, they need to be on board with the program and understand the limits of what they can do.
Right.
Because a lot of times you'll find that, all of a sudden somebody shows up and you're like, I didn't even know this person was coming. And, you talk to the service provider and they're like, oh, but so-and-so called and said they needed this in emergency, and they think they're helping. But, by not kind of abiding by the process, or at least following, the steps of an emergency process, you really can't, they're not helping.
Right. Definitely a measurement of success with these programs is your supplier relationships and making sure that you've reined them all in. So conducting supplier forums, supplier QBRs, having rules for your suppliers. A lot of programs you'll see have rules where managers are not allowed to interact with the suppliers. Some of those can be super strict because I always ran my program in the thought that if my suppliers were truly a partner to me and we trusted each other, then they're not really going to go rogue. Whereas others, I feel if you put too much restriction on the supplier, they tend to sneak around your back or try and get in the back doors all the time. So I think just having an open relationship and building that honesty with each other so that you can trust each other and have a true partnership is what's key. But, there's no reason you can't write into your supplier contracts, that there's rules around the program. And if we used to have penalties. If you break, 1, 2, or 3 rules, you could be out of the program. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think great points. Rihanna, I want to turn back to you because I feel like one of the things that, and I work with you, so I have the benefit of, a little bit more of a closer view of, kind of how you work and your approach. But, you take a very, very hands-on approach to running a sourcing event or, executing a strategy or developing a strategy. And, by the way, a little plug for Rihanna, her clients love her. And, I think one of the main reasons is that you just roll up your sleeves and you jump in. And I'm curious to know, like, what's that mentality? Like, what is your mentality when you're approaching, sourcing something like this, when you're dealing with these cross-functional teams? Maybe there's people maybe it's people that you're working with for the first time. But, you know, what is it in your mentality that kind of causes you to just say, look, I'm just going to roll up my sleeves and jump right in? How do you approach these things?
I think it's the project manager mentality and looking at everything from that holistic top-down view. You may be there representing sourcing or procurement, but that's not your only role. Your role is to shepherd them through this entire project of a process, which is sourcing. And so really, employing those techniques of understanding your stakeholders, adjusting to their communication styles, really figuring out what kind of communications work best in working with them. Do they want to have a daily meeting? Do they want you to send them an email? They want you to call them every 25 minutes to see what's going on? And really just adapting to that and figuring out what works best, because having your stakeholders on your side, especially when it comes to construction services and engineering, the technical folks that are in the business, having them see you as a trusted partner goes further than anything else you can do, really. And so really just having that mentality and looking at everything from the sake of a project view. Each sourcing event is a project, no matter how big or how small, and having a project plan and a communication plan, and sometimes an implementation plan if there's a big transition coming in, and acting as that conduit of communicating the importance of that between the business and with the business, and being able to let that flow down to the contractors as well in the sourcing event. For example, communicating the importance of needing a good view of the work or the volume or whatever you're sourcing, how much you're going to source. You have a lot more leverage with your suppliers in negotiating pricing and contracts, and really just executing a successful sourcing event.
Yeah, no, and I think that mentality is so important. And, we talked earlier about cross-functional teams, and that we really do recommend the establishment of cross-functional teams. And that sounds it may sound almost sort of basic, like, well, of course, why wouldn't you do that? But it's surprising how many procurement teams don't think that way, or they think they're working cross-functionally, but really they're very siloed. It's like you've got the procurement process, you've got the business, you've got finance, you've got the supplier, and everybody's kind of working independently. Maybe they're coming together, once a week, periodically to touch base, but they're not really working cross-functionally. And more importantly, they're not all kind of, to your point about the project, they're not all looking at the sourcing event or the category strategy as a project. They're looking at it as like, oh, well, I have to, I've got this checklist of things I need to get done. And so I think the opportunity for procurement to step into that role and really take ownership, and it can feel, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Rihanna, it can feel a little awkward at first, because you might have people sitting there saying, well, that's not what procurement does. But it is absolutely what procurement does. And I think our ability to, again, have that holistic view of what is the end goal that we're trying to achieve, and helping to, keep everybody on track. I mean, I've never seen a stakeholder turn me down when I've offered to do that. So I think having that project ownership mentality, and I think your point as well about communicating in the method and frequency that your stakeholders want is important, because, back to the corralling and wrangling, I mean, no two are the same. And especially if it's a highly visible project, it's often, you're going to get people coming out of the woodwork that are going to be looking for updates and, statuses and things like that. And so having a good handle on who those people are, what's their role, what do they want to know? They don't want to know everything. Maybe they just want the high level, here's where we are on the schedule. And Rihanna, the last part that I would ask you to chime in on, because I think it's really important, is it's the very last box on the lower right-hand side about tailoring your sourcing approach. And I'm curious, if you could talk about that a little bit more. What's, in terms of adjusting your sourcing approach to the type of service that you're looking to source, and how does the either the urgency of the need or the type of need impact the sourcing strategy that you use?
Yeah, and it's really back to a point of there's no one size fits all approach. You really should be tailoring each sourcing approach to the needs of that event. And when you're working in the services categories as a whole, and this can be applied to most services, is if you have an ongoing repeatable program where the work is well defined, you can implement a type of unit pricing or some sort of repeatable pricing so that your end users have the flexibility to leverage that pricing mechanism as they need to, as work volumes fluctuate, as work's executed. But then you also have to look at do you have one-time projects? How are you going to handle emergency work when you're negotiating that ongoing or that one-time project? Looking at in there is how can I factor in for potential emergency work with respect to construction services into my master services agreement? How can I leverage this spend to negotiate labor rates now, so that way when an emergency event comes on down the road, we're not stuck, but we're not at the demands of the contractors. We have fair negotiated pricing in place.
Yeah, and I think, Kim, that is really relevant to what you were saying earlier and what we were talking about of, sometimes people panic and they make decisions that they wouldn't normally make because they're in an urgent situation, they have an urgent need. So yeah, having kind of planning, the contingency planning and planning in advance for what am I going to do if somebody calls me on a Friday and says I need somebody here on a Monday? Who are the suppliers I know I can count on? What sort of processes do I have in place to allow me to do that in a way that doesn't completely throw my process out the window? And what do I need from the stakeholder? Like, what am I going to hold them accountable for? Okay, we have just a couple of minutes that went by extremely fast. I think the bottom line with services categories is there are some unique challenges. I mean, whether it's the fact that, as we were kind of chatting about, that there are these, we find these categories and a lot of them do tend to fall in the services realm that nobody really wants to own. And procurement kind of winds up owning it because nobody else is really willing to own it. That can be a real challenge for people that are, sourcing services. And you add to that, again, market volatility that we're experiencing right now, some of the issues with service quality, needing to understand a wide array of complex services and a wide array of technical services. But I think ultimately, kind of one of the themes as well that we want to reiterate is that this is a fantastic opportunity for procurement. And, for us to, really do the legwork, to understand what our stakeholders are trying to achieve, find them, first of all, find them if they're spread out, understand what they're wanting to achieve, and then how can we help make them successful? And again, I think the opportunity for procurement to really play a leadership role in executing, again, whether it's a category strategy, a contingent labor program, or sourcing, a one-time construction event. I think, there are similarities across all of those. And, at the end of the day, it comes down to, again, procurement really stepping up and taking the ownership and, willing to do the work and roll up our sleeves and understand, the supplier landscape, the stakeholders' needs, and how we can most effectively meet those. So we are at time for this session. So we're going to take another little break. And
yeah, hopefully my microphone works.
It is working.
Hear me. Great. Contingency. One thing I learned, I guess, in procurement supply chain is always have a plan B. Yes. So, I was unboxing a brand new USB mic to put into the side of my laptop to hopefully, and pray then when I turned it on that it worked. No, one of the things that's just to wrap up kind of something you said is that these categories, these complex categories provide such a great opportunity for procurement because you can connect the dots. we're able to connect dots that a lot of folks within the organizations don't see, because they're just seeing things like with their blinkers on and their own kind of worldview, but also they don't necessarily want to get their hands dirty to bring everything together. And so I love when we're able to get involved in categories like these and more complex ones, because that's when you really show the difference that we can make. So I want to thank Rihanna, Kim, Betsy. We're keeping you busy. But I want to thank you for this session. Waiting in the wings, I think, for our next performance is Alex Fletcher, who will be joining you, Betsy, to talk about managing your categories in inflationary times. Such an important category, really timely, really looking forward to this one.